So this is about enrollment tracking data sets and using Power Query to utilize those data sets. My name is Christina Smith. I'm a business analyst senior with the University Registrar Technology Services. Today we'll be covering the groundwork, talking about what Power Query is, the enrollment tracking data sets, the Excel features we'll be using. I'll be giving you a demonstration. Then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then it'll be your turn to actually try it out. So, laying the groundwork. What is Power Query? So, first, I do want to give a little bit of credit where credit's due. 2 years ago in 2022, Brady Hampton, a prior member of our team, did a similar presentation. He did a spectacular job. I do recommend that presentation as well. This next piece I pulled heavily from his presentation. But he does have a little bit more information in that presentation as well that I won't be covering. So it's worth a look if you're really deeply interested in this. So Power Query is a data transformation and data preparation engine. Power Query comes with a graphical interface for getting data from sources and a Power Query editor for applying transformations, because the engine is available in many products and services. So this is something I didn't know. This is available in more than just one Microsoft tool. The destination where the data will be stored depends on where Power Query was used. Using Power Query, you can perform the extract, transform, and load processing of data. And so that's the first benefit of Power Query that I want to talk about. If you will, the power of Power Query is that it is a extract, transform, and load tool. And so in our example, we're going to be extracting from a CSV file. Then we'll be using the Power Query tool to transform the data and then loading that into a report, into an Excel report. Another great feature of Power Query that can be very useful is that you can merge data from multiple data sources. Sometimes just if you need to do a simple comparison, but maybe it's a very large data set, Power Query can actually allow you to do that. You can also append data from different data sources. And then finally, one of the best and biggest benefits for us, I think, in this context, is the automation piece. It allows you to apply steps in the transformation part, and these steps are saved with your report. And then it's just a matter of refreshing the data in order to pull in that data set that is updated daily for you to use and get your new refreshed data for that day's data set. Okay, so we're going to talk about the enrollment tracking data now. So before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the data, what I do want to emphasize is that these enrollment tracking data sets are specifically designed to be used with the enrollment tracking reports that you will find in the enrollment and records group in analytics. So if you're not familiar with that, that's a great place to check out. You do have to have access to student record data in order to access those reports in the enrollment and record group. So there's a few groupings here on this page that I want us to take note of, and I want you to be thinking about these elements as we move forward in the next slides. So note that there are comparison reports on here, so that's comparing data from the prior like term based on the snapshot day or week. There's current reports. That is not based on snapshot data, it's just pulling data from data warehouse as of that day. And then there's the class funding reports. So these groups here are looking at the enrollment headcount by the student's major. And so this is doing a distinct count of the headcount of the students, but it's looking at their primary record in their major, and it's looking at the department, college, or campus that's affiliated with their major. The class funding reports are looking at the enrolled headcount, or the SCH FTE, based on class enrollment. And so it's very important that you understand the differences between what each of these are counting. And just a moment. Sorry, this next bit I definitely want to read my notes for you. Maybe. Okay, so now let's jump into the nitty-gritty of it, the data tables. So the current tables, so these are the current tables that you'll see, and we have the comparison tables. And so there's two big data sets that we're talking about, and so they're broken into the current and the comparison. And you'll see that both of these use similar, the same tables. There's a couple of tables that are used in both of these data sets. And then for these data tables here, the student profile, student enrolled, A class, and the D-person view, they're basically the same over here in the comparison, except it's just using a snapshot version of the exact same table. Okay. The other thing I also wanted to say too is if you guys have questions along the way, please just raise your hand and say, I have a question, and interrupt me. It's probably, this is going to be a long session. It's probably better that we address those sections as you think of them, or address those questions as you think of them. So don't hesitate to stop me and ask a question, okay? So these data tables are then used in an enrollment tracking Alteryx workflow. So how many of you actually use Alteryx in here? Okay, 3 of you, 4. So even if you're not using Alteryx, I think it's still important for you to understand the progression of what's creating these data sets that you would be using. And so on one hand, it's neat to see that, but on the other hand, the more layers you add, the more places that things go wrong. And so it's just good for you to be aware of that, especially when it comes to when you're trying to validate your data, trying to figure out what's going on. Understanding this, there's multiple pieces driving this is helpful to you. So for those of you that are familiar with Alteryx, you'll see that we have a lot of in-database elements. This is not always the norm of how people will use Alteryx, but we actually pull in each individual table, filter it, join it. We do it in this way in our team specifically because it is easier for us to maintain and understand the connections of how the data is being built and pulled in. So it's very much, we use it very much like a visual query builder tool. Then we have these in-memory sections that do a lot of transformation, and obviously Alteryx is also an ETL tool. And so we're doing a lot of transformations. All of these are very specific to the enrollment tracking reports. And then we have 2 groups of outputs. Let me also back up and say that there's 2 workflows that we run, one that is the current enrollment tracking and one that is the comparison enrollment tracking, okay? They look exactly the same, except for they're using those different groups of tables that I showed there in the last slide. For the outputs, there's 2 outputs, one that is going either to the enrollment tracking current or the enrollment tracking comparison. And then there is another group of outputs that is going to what we call the enrollment tracking current detail or the enrollment tracking comparison detail. The enrollment tracking current, this is where I want my notes for you guys here. Okay, so the enrollment tracking comparison current, they're going to have the granularity of these is that they're going to have 1 row per term per student. The enrollment tracking detail are going to have 1 row per student per term per class number that they're enrolled in. And if it exists, if the student has subplans, those rows for each of their class numbers are going to be doubled for each of their subplans. That subplan, when it's a subplan, I'm talking about it's on their primary record. So it's important to understand the granularity in those detail tables. And the big impact is basically the size of that output. The other thing to understand too is the terms that we're pulling in here. The current workflow is going to be pulling in for the current enrolled terms. So that's going to be a summer, fall, and spring. And so, for example, right now, the current workflow would be pulling in summer 24, fall 24, and spring 25. The comparison is going to be pulling in those exact same terms plus the prior like term for each of those. So a total of 6 terms in those comparison data sets, okay? So each of these outputs have 3 different places they're outputting to Two of these are outputting to AUDB tables. So that is the Aurora user database. These are user-made tables that if you have access to a BI desktop, how many actually use a BI desktop? Cool. If you're using and if you're not, that's what the CSV files will be. We'll get to that in a minute. So if you have the BI desktop, you have access to these AUDB tables. If you have the BI desktop, you're probably going to want to lean more towards using those than the CSV files for what you want to do. Nonetheless, so there's two AUDB outputs on each of these groups. One is going to the enterprise schema, which is the one that you guys, so it's the Enroll Records Enterprise, ENT, that you would have access to, and another one that's going to the Enroll Records team, which is what my team in RedCheck has access to. So to summarize these outputs, and this is the key part of what you guys really care about, there's the AUDB outputs, so there's 4 tables: the enrollment tracking current detail, the enrollment tracking comparison, and the enrollment tracking comparison detail. For the CSV outputs, you would access those at this Analytics FSX shared drive. And also note that to keep the CSV files a little bit more manageable, the comparison ones are broken out by term. But again, we have current and current detail, and we have the comparison and the comparison detail groups for each of these CSVs. We realized a couple of years ago in experimenting with these for our own reports that these detail tables, and again, think about that granularity in those detail tables, they are very large. And so when you're trying to pull these CSV files into Power Query in Excel, it can take upwards of like 30 to 60 minutes to load that thing. They're big. So, so you have a couple of options there. You could go to the FX drive and grab that CSV file, filter it to exactly what you want, and take it, save it, filter it to what you want, and then upload it to your Power Query. Or we have created summary versions of these. So these are aggregated files for these. And these work really well with Power Query. So we have a comparison, enrollment tracking summary workflow, and we have a current version of that. And so this is pulling in from the AUDB tables, summarizing the data based off of the fields that we're wanting, and getting a distinct count of the student MPL IDs and outputting to the CSV file. And so both of these are doing the exact same thing. And new this year, I'm proud to announce that we now also have past funding. So we have current and comparison class funding headcount and SCH and FTE outputs for you to use as well. So yay. So the aggregated CSV files that you can use are the enrollment tracking current summary, and then we have the class funding headcount and SCH current detailed summaries, and then we have the comparison summary, and then the class funding headcount and SCH versions of those as well. So yay, I hope some of you can actually find some use in those. Okay, so that's talking about the data source. So that's the load. This is what we're loading into our Power Query. And then the next step is transform. But before we transform, we have to think a little bit about what we need to transform. And so we have to kind of, if you will, back into this by thinking about our report and thinking about, we have to look at our data set and we have to look at our report and figure out what we need in between those two. Okay, and so those are the pieces that we're transforming. So here at the top, we have an example of the CSV file, and here we have an example of a report. So let's say that we want to find the data that's going to populate this specific cell on the spreadsheet. So first, so you'll notice in the report, this is a by campus report. We're looking at the NRC values, new returning, continuing, and then what we call R&I values. So it's the resident, non-resident, international. And then we're grouping this by term, by campus, and then comparing by term. So for that particular cell, So first, if we compare our report to the output, we see that we do have a column for the campus description. We also have a column for the term label. So spring 2024 doesn't match 2024, but we could use those last four characters of that field to match on. We need to find undergraduates. In the bottom part of this report, there is a section for graduates. And then we also need to find the NRC. In the file output, I don't know how clearly you can see these, but you'll notice that there's two groupings for NRC. There's the old NRC that we used to use that didn't include the associate designations at the undergrad level. But the NRC 2023 is pretty much what you're going to probably want to use if you want to include those associate groupings. And then we have the RNI for the Arizona resident, non-resident, international grouping. So to find these 9 students, so I happen to sort this CSV output specifically to group these together. And sure enough, if you add up here along this side of the, for the count distinct EPIL ID, you'll see that that does indeed total up to 9. And so these top rows are exactly what we want. So then how do we get that data into this cell? And so that's going to be the VLOOKUP formula. So how many of you have used VLOOKUP before? Great, most of you have. That's wonderful. That's going to make this a little bit easier. This is a wonderfully helpful formula, so definitely check it out. So the VLOOKUP is broken into 4 pieces. So first, you want what you want to look up, where you want to look for it, the column number and the range containing the value to return. So in that place where you're looking for it, the column number where that the distinct count exists, basically. And then return an approximate or exact match. Excel, the logic is a little reversed here. You're actually going to use false for an exact match. True is an approximate match. And so for our purposes, we're going to be using false to get that exact match. So again, what we want to look up is going to be the term, the campus, the career, NRC, and RNI. So where you want to look for it. One place that we could look for it maybe is a pivot table, but instead of the rows, so you have an example of a pivot table with those rows, maybe we could create a new column combining these values or concatenating these values into one field. And that's what it would search through to find the match to then find the number. Did that make sense, guys? I'm looking at my RegTech team. Okay, good. So here's an example of that. So we would create this concatenated column in our pivot that would be created from the load part, from what we've transformed. And then we get our count. And so it would be column number 2. For the column number, this would be, so it's A is 1, B is 2, and it always starts with A as being number 1 and goes straight across. So you're wherever you have your data in your spreadsheet, you're counting from column A. So it would be number 2 and then false. So our formula is going to look like this. So we have the VLOOKUP and then we have the concat formula within that. And so the concat is first pulling in C3 to get the year, pulling in C2 to get the campus, and then is pulling in column A1. Now column A1 is manually created basically, and in your end report is hidden. Number 1 is the sort value for the career. So we have 2 careers, undergrad and grad. Grad combines the law and grad together. So we just have the 2 sort values, 1 and 2. So we use that first. The reason the sort value is better in this instance is then you're not having to worry about if the description of undergraduates is all caps or proper case. And so that just solves that problem doing it that way. And then you have the values for the new returning continuing, and then the resident values. And so it's concatenating those. So this one here is kind of already pre-concatenated. You only have to create this once, but once you have it, it's good. It's tricky sometimes when you're doing your final report and checking it out. So I actually realized after I took the screenshot that I made a mistake and there's a space between the 1 and the first year. I had to go back and remove that from our report to work. So my team will tell you I love to teach from my mistakes because, you know, that's how we learn, is by making mistakes. And some of the best lessons come from our mistakes. So don't ever be afraid of making mistakes. So another piece of this formula that we need to think about, what if when the VLOOKUP looks for that data and there's nothing there? What do we want it to show on our report? So in this case, we want it to, if there's an error, it doesn't find anything, we want it to show a 0. So we group around our VLOOKUP formula this if error. And so this if error, and then there's a comma, and then a 0 is what we want it to show, and then another close parenthesis. So that's our full formula that we'll be using. So another piece, as far as looking at a report, we need to kind of plan about what goes where. And so VLOOKUP isn't going to exist in every single one of our cells in our report, okay? So we have subtotal columns. So for example, here we have a for campus. And so this is going to be just a simple sum function, summing the matching elements. The total is also going to be another sum function. And then, of course, you have your percentages. And so again, and you can see the formula we use there. And then to look at the rest of the sheet, and the example sheet we'll use has one extra column here. I'll explain that when we get to it. But then you also have your grand totals at the end that are also going to be another sum group. So, for example, if you're looking at your spreadsheet, these green columns are going to be where the VLOOKUPs are going to be, and then everything else is going to be other formulas. So I'm going to provide for you a pre-created spreadsheet that you can use that has all these formulas already in it. So that takes the grind work of having to create this piece out of the equation for the type of report that I'm going to provide for you. So yay, say thank you. That's there for you to use. And even if you don't want that specific report, you can use it as an example to kind of learn from and draw from, okay? But my point of showing you all this is when it comes to you creating your own custom report, you're going to have to do this all this work on your own and figure out how to do this. I want to talk about, so notice, so we have the 2024 and the 2025 here. So when you're building the spreadsheet, okay, and when you are having to do these columns on your own, you want to be using your absolute values in a smart way. So the 2025 formula is going to look a little different. Now, one of the things here, notice that this temp P value is in a merged column. And so that part of the concatenate formula is going to have to also be C2 for 2025. So if you just drag this over here and try to copy this formula over to 2025, you're going to have to it's going to change that to D2. Because I wanted to then take these and drag it down, I made the choice to then have the formula in this cell, just have the C2, and then I could drag both of these down to the next values. And then it's a matter of taking this and you copy and paste those 6 cells into the next 6 and down, and then you can do your column. Okay, and so you learn pretty quickly, you figure out pretty quickly how to do some pretty quick shortcuts of how to create those formulas when you're building your spreadsheet. So, but that's one tip to think about. And so you might have to experiment with your absolute value, where you're putting your absolute value markers in your cells, in your formulas, to help make that copy and pasting easier. All right. So another feature that I want to talk a little bit about is slicers. You can basically these allow you to filter report results with slicers. And so we'll be talking about that, and I'll show you some examples of that. And so for our report, we'll be attaching one for college and department. Okay, now it is demonstration time. And this is the part where I really need a mic stand holder. Team, who wants to volunteer to be a mic stand holder? Dimitri Seymour, everybody. Give him a hand. Thank you. He's going to help. Because I need 2 hands for this. Thanks, dude. Okay. Wherever works. Okay. It's fine. Well, it's all good. Okay, so I want to show you a little bit about where some things are. In analytics, if you want to find our group, assuming you already have access to it, you're going to go to My Groups and you can just type enrollment and you'll find our group. And if you don't have access to it, this does tell you how to get access to it. You won't be able to do the second half of this session if you don't already have access to student record data, so keep that in mind. But then you can click on this link and it'll take you to our enrollment records page. This is where the enrollment tracking reports are. And then there is the enrollment records training. So if you click on that link, that's going to take you here. So for the second half of this presentation, I have a link here for the enrollment tracking datasets quick reference guide. So that just gives you a quick reference for all of the CSV files and a few tips and tricks that, for you to think about what to filter and things like that. Here we have the enrollment tracking Power Query training guide. So this is what you're going to want. This is going to be your step-by-step for the second half of this. Okay. And so you'll want to go into analytics and go grab this document here. And that's what I'm going to be following during the demonstration part. And then we have 2 Excel sheets here. The query example, which is already connected. And so this is the final piece of it, the end result. So you could take that and manipulate that if you want to. But for the training purposes, you can use this one here. It's not connected and you can start from that and then go through the training and actually practice yourself how to do this. So that's where all of this is going to be at. Okay, so another thing that I also want to explain before we jump in. How many of you are old enough to have watched the series ER? Remember that? Okay, awesome. One of the things very early on in that series that I remember them talking about was this concept of how they train their people in the emergency room. And it was basically, you show them, then you have them do it, and then you have them teach it. And so that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. So this part is the show part. I'm going to be showing you how to do it. So don't be trying to multitask and follow along and do it yourself right now. Watch, okay? Watch and listen, okay? Give yourself that opportunity to absorb. Then we'll have the second half for you to actually do the do part. And then it'll be on you to go train. Go take this and teach someone in your area about how to do this as well. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do with this is we need to download this. So when you click on the link here for the enrollment tracking Power Query example for training, not connected, you're going to go to File, Create Copy, and Download a Copy. And then depending on your browser, hopefully it's going to show up somewhere here for you, and you're going to be able to click on that and open up an actual Excel sheet. And I would recommend doing that from an Excel sheet, not from that linked sheet. When you see this yellow bar, Enable Editing, you definitely want to click that. And now we're going to go to Data. So data is where all the fun parts happen. And you can either go to Get Data from File and select Text or CSV, or you can just click right here. You may have a shortcut here as well from text CSV. So I'm going to click on that. And then let me actually show you how to get this. I'm going to go to the training guide. And I would love to zoom this, but I'm not going to worry about it. In the training guide, you should be able to copy the link that you need. And I want to go back here. Now you may need to have the Alteryx FX or the Analytics FXX space book, not bookmarked, but available in your, what's the word? Yeah, you're gonna, well, but the net, you're gonna need to have it mapped. Okay, so once you do that, you're gonna click open. But yeah, you may need to map the drive to the FXS space is what I'm saying. It'll tell you that you're waiting, and then you'll see this pop up and you're gonna click on transform data. Okay, so Power Query is a very smart tool, and right off the bat, you'll see that it's already applied a couple of steps for us over here in this section. So we're going to review each of those and look at what it did. So the first thing that we have here is our source. And also note that you can expand this. Here in the source area, note what information is in here. One of the things that it has here is columns. So sometimes when you're troubleshooting these, if you're missing a field or you're getting an error that it's not finding a field, look at the original data set, look at the number of columns, and then see what is saved in your spreadsheet. You might need to increase the number of columns there. And so again, you're learning from my mistakes. This is what broke another spreadsheet that we had available. So that's the key thing to be aware of there, is that if you're having trouble with the connection, this is probably the first place to start. So also note the column. So we just have these column numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. And then we have our headers here. So the next step that it does, that Power Query does, because again, it's smart, is it promotes our headers. And so it changes them, pulls them out of the spreadsheet and puts them at the top as headers. And then the next thing that it does is it changes the type. And so Power Query tries to guess what data type each of your columns are. Sometimes it guesses right, sometimes it doesn't. And so one of the first things that you're going to want to do is think about, you're going to want to expand this, look at what types have changed and decide if you really want all of those. You can also see the type in these little icons that are on each of the columns. So I'm actually going to close this. And so one of the first things that I want to change, because I'm going to need it, is the career sort. So I'm going to actually change this. So you click on here, and then I'm going to change this to text. Now it's going to give you this pop-up here, okay? And so it's asking if you want to add a new step or if you just want to replace the current. And so I'm just going to replace the current because I don't need an extra step in here. I just want to change what it did in that original step. So now that is a text column, and then that's going to be used in some of my next columns. All right. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is filter our data. And so now this is another thing to think about, both when you're troubleshooting, but you need to plan ahead a little bit about where you want to filter your data. Do you want to filter it here, or do you want to filter it later on when it's actually in your report? So think about that. For our purposes, I'm going to filter first the terms. And so I'm going to select, we're going to compare spring 25 to spring 24. I'm going to click OK, and notice that it adds a new step for us. The next thing is that, and this is something with the enrollment tracking data that you always want to do unless you know you don't. And that is to filter on the state reported equals yes. There are very few situations where you probably need to see the non-state reported, okay? That used to be called the state funded. We were asked to change it to state reported. But keep that in mind and don't ever forget that step. That's very important. If you're using the detailed data sets, another important filter that you're going to want to also think about. So in there, if you're actually looking at the class funding, then you're going to actually want the state funding for the class data, I'm forgetting what the name of the field is, but you'll want that one in there. That is in the shortcut spreadsheet that's available on the training guide. The other thing is, I had it and I forgot it. You may need to also filter to the primary record. So if you're not wanting to look at that subplane data that's in that detail, you want to also filter on the primary record. The non-detail outputs are already filtered to the primary record. And so by primary record, I'm talking about like the program plan stack of the student, okay? All righty, so those are the two filters we're going to add here. And notice it put both of them here. So if I click on this now, you'll see that it shows both of the filters that we've added. You two can switch off when you need to if you get tired. Stand it up. Of course. All righty. Okay, so another thing on filtering to point out. Okay, so let's say you want to filter on department, for example. You'll notice this warning down here, list may not be complete. That's because in this view, it's only loading part of the data for you. Okay, it's giving you a sample. And so if you don't see what you want here in this list, then you may need to click on this load more to actually see that value populate. So it just means that it's at the bottom of your data set. And so especially if you're working with the detail one, keep in mind that's going to be, you know, a very large data set. So just be aware of that. Okay, so now we're going to need 3 custom columns. We need one to match the reporting year. We need one to match our campus columns that we have in our original report. And one that will be using a VLOOKUP formula in our report. And one that's going to create the values that we need in the VLOOKUP for our report. Well, I'd have to close and reopen this. We'll do that later. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. When we get there. Okay. For adding the year, we're going to do add column and we're going to do extract. And so actually my first step was, sorry, forgot. You want to select the term label. So add column, extract, and we want the last characters. It's going to give you a pop-up asking you how many characters. We want 4 for the year. And we're going to click OK. And so then you'll notice at the end, it added this another column for us. And also in it, it also named it for us. Well, I don't like that name, so I'm going to double click here. There we go. I'm going to change this to year. Okay. And then it adds another step that it renamed this as well. All righty. Now. All right. This is a fun one. So the next one that we want to do is going to we want conditional column. So this is going to be creating our campus groups to match our report. So this is going to be like a string of if-then statements. So we're going to select the campus description, the operator, and you have a choice of operators here. So if it equals Tempe, then Tempe. Then you're going to click Add Clause. And again, we're going to do the campus description. If it equals West space Valley. This is the painful, boring part when we have a few repetitive steps that you guys get to watch me suffer through. I sure hope I spelled that right. We'll find out soon enough if I didn't. And downtown Phoenix. And note that we, if you guys aren't aware of it, when you're doing reports that have West Valley or downtown, use West. Don't just use West Valley. And if downtown, use downtown Phoenix is our recommendation. And now we want to, we're looking for online, but what we want to match in our report is going to be digital immersion. And you'll see that in the, did I spell that right? Immersion. There we go. Thank you. And then if it doesn't meet any of those, then we want other locations. Don't forget the S at the end. I forgot that several times and had to come back here and redo it. And I also forgot the first step, which was naming the column. So this does let you name the column. We're going to call this campus group. Thank you. My team knows me so well. They know I can't spell with a hoot. Okay. And now you do too, but yeah. It's all good. Okay, so there we go. We have two fields that we need to use in our final function. So now we're just going to do custom column. And again, we're still on the add column section. We're going to name this one VLOOKUP. And so first we want our year. We're going to click insert. And then we're going to use the ampersand because now we're creating this concatenated field, right? And then we're going to use our career sort. Oh, no, excuse me. We're going to use our new campus field, our campus group. Insert that. The order that you do these in, you need to make sure it's going to match the order of what your concatenate portion of your VLOOKUP formula is going to be. So make sure you're doing these in the same order. So keep that in mind as you're building this. So whatever order you're doing that, you intend to do that in. Or when if you're creating your VLOOKUPs after you do this piece, then make sure you know what order you created this in. Okay, so now we want the undergraduate sort, or excuse me, the career sort. Career sort. And that. Now we want the NRC 2023. And then we want the RNI. Okay, and then there's our custom column. And you'll see that it adds all of these for us as we go along. So that's it. That's all we need to transform for this right now for it to work for our report. So now we need to go back to the home. And now we see this option here for close and load. You want to click on this drop down. You have two options to close and load. That's going to just simply load this as another sheet into your report. And then you can take that and do what you want with it. But you do have this option to do close and load too. So when you click on that, it's going to pull you back to your spreadsheet, and then it's going to show you this import data option here. So we're going to load this into a pivot table report. We're going to add it as a new worksheet. And we definitely want to click add this data to the data model. By clicking that, that does two things. It allows you to use a count distinct function. We actually won't be using that here, but if you need it, you definitely want to have that. But the other thing it does is it loads it into the data model behind the entire spreadsheet, so you can easily and quickly create other pivots off of that. So it'll already be there and you can reuse it. So now we're going to click OK. Let it spin just a moment. So now we have this new sheet 1 created. We have this queries and connections piece. I'm going to X that out for right now. So all I'm looking at now is my pivot table. So now we're going to create our pivot. And that's going to take our VLOOKUP. We're going to put that into the rows. And then we're also going to take our count distinct EMPL ID and we're going to add it here into the values. And so here, all we wanted to do is sum, and that's exactly what it's going to do. And then, so now we have our pivot table. So we should magically go over here and see that everything's populated in our report. But it's not. Something's wrong. Wonder what's wrong. Okay. Before we jump to that, let me just talk about this example sheet that I provided for you. We actually don't have any reports that look exactly like this, so I made this up with the hope that it's something that can be useful to you that you could easily use as a starting place to create your own reports from. So some of you might want to have this 4 campus total in there. Some of you might not. If you don't need it, delete it. Some of you may or may not want the other locations in there. If you don't need it, delete it. If you want to instead actually list each individual location, you'll need to go in and add the ones that you want. Campus immersion. So combining the 4 campus and the other locations together, or digital immersion, and then the whole total. So again, you can take this, save off a copy and manipulate it however you want to. But hopefully I'm giving you some good starting places with that. Okay, so let's look at our formula. So right off the bat, we see we have this reference, problem with the reference. So now, so what we're going to do, I was making sure I could see clearly exactly where I want to do this. So in between those commas, I want to do a find and replace. And so what's wonderful about Excel is we can really easily fix this by just we want to find, well, actually first, go to options, make sure you expand options, make sure you're looking in formulas when you do this, okay? We want to find ref pound. Oh, and actually, before I do this, I need to do another step. We're going to go here to the spreadsheet. We're going to actually rename this. Oops, sorry. Campus data. You could use raw data. You could use whatever you want to for the name of that tab. In the end, that tab is going to be hidden. It's not going to be visible. Okay, but we do want to give it the name first before we do this piece. The other thing we need to look at too is the size of it. And so we need to look at how many rows this is going down. That's 240. Give yourself a good size buffer. So we're going to actually give us a range of probably down to 300. And so what I'm going to do, a little cheaty cheat. You know what? I'm actually going to try this and see if it works. Whoops. I'm actually going to try selecting both columns and see if this works. It might not. Okay, so that's what I want to paste. That's what I want to change it to. Alrighty, and I'm actually going to delete that now. All right, so we're going to start here. We're going to find. I'm going to grab what I copied in here. And that's what we're going to replace. Now we're going to click replace all. Yeah. What's that?
That equals cams.
Thank you. That's an easy fix, isn't it? Whoops. It's really mad for me, isn't it? There we go. That should work. There we go. All done. Made 396 replacements. Woohoo. And look at that. We got data. I'm excited. Okay. So, yay. All right. So the next piece that we're going to play with now is slicers. So what you'll want to do is go back to your data section and go to insert slicer. There's probably a lot of different ways to do this, and the way I figured it out may or may not be the best way, but this is how I got it to work for me. So we want to use that same connection. We're going to use the same data model. So again, when we check that, creating the pivot and we check that data model, it's using the same thing. And we're going to click open. Here. Sorry, you need to have the pivot table selected, then slicer. And then what I want to create is I want two slicers. I'm going to want the college short description and the department adjusted description. And so those are just the pretty descriptions that we like to use in our reports. We're going to click that and it's going to create these two slicers for us. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut and paste these into my main report. So I'm going to put the college one there. I'm going to widen it out. Actually, I'm going to put it over here against this side of the B column. Going to widen it, and I'm going to make sure it's wide enough for all of my descriptions, and it's not. So you basically just copy and paste these in there and you make them the size and whatever that you want. All right. Now, so now you right click here and there's a couple of different things you can do here. So slicer settings. You can change the name of it. Display header is important. So if you want to give instructions like select one college, you know, if you don't want them to select multiples or something like that, you could do instructions there if you wanted to. You can decide how you want it to sort. And then you have these hide things. So you can either hide items that don't have data, visually indicate if the item doesn't have data. If you want to show the items with no data at the bottom, you can also do that. I'm going to uncheck that here. The other thing that you can also do on each of these, and it can be a little finicky when you're trying to do your right click, is the size properties. If you expand this here, we're doing time. And you can disable moving those around. Okay, so I'll end the presentation there, or the demonstration. I'll see you guys back here in about 10 minutes. For those of you who want to actually try this on your own, and we'll walk through, we'll repeat all these steps exactly following the job aid I have. Okay? Thank you very much. We'll see you guys in 10 minutes for those of you who want to come back.